Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. In this tutorial, I'll show you how you can use a stamp and matching stencil together to create the look of a reflection in water. The stamp I'm using has a matching stencil, but I could also use a stamped image to create a reverse mask, and that works just the same as a stencil. To create a reverse mask, just stamp your image onto text weight paper or acetate, and then cut around the outline using a craft knife. Because I'm working with a large stamp, I just want to get an idea first of where to position my stamp on the layout. So before I ink it up, I'm just laying the stamp onto my card and determining the position that I want. Once I decide the position, I want to determine a horizontal line that will be the top of my water surface, and I'll mask that line with some sticky back paper. The next step is to stamp the image, and I want my flower to dip down into the water, so I'm stamping it just slightly over the edge of the mask. If you want your reflection to begin above the water, you can stamp above the mask. I'm using this matching penny black stencil to save some time in coloring my stamped image. If you cut a reverse mask of your image, you can use it in the same way here. These are Versamagic chalk inks that I'm using directly on the paper. You could also use sponges or dauber or a stipple brush to apply color on this step. Just make sure that you're using a medium or ink that will blend with water. Cleaning off my stencil because I'm going to flip it over and I don't want that ink to go onto my coloring surface. I'll remove the horizontal mask, take my stencil and flip it over, and then position it so the opening is at equal distance and opposite angles to the stamped image from the horizontal line. I'm going to fill in the open area of the stencil with color just like I did on the top. And I'm not worried about it being perfect because the reflected area is going to be a little bit distorted as if there were ripples in the water. So I have my base of color in, and I decided I wanted to add more shading, so I'm using watercolor pencils to fill in some of the shaded areas in the stamped image, and I'll echo the same shaded shapes in the reflected area below. Remember when you're coloring and shading that the reflection is a mirror image, so you'll reverse the angles of your shading. If you curve up, then the reflection needs to curve down. If you shaded toward the bottom of the stamped image, then the reflected image needs to be shaded toward the top. The pencils that I'm using to add my shading are Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils, and I really love how these blend and how vibrant the colors are. The pencil format is also really great for adding details and shading. I'm going to blend the shading with water on a brush, and in my stamped image, I want to keep my blending within the stamped outlines and blend the shading into the inked area. Just blend those colors all nicely together. For the lower area of the panel where the water is creating a reflection, I want my brush strokes to be horizontal, and I'm not concerned about keeping the strokes within the colored area. I know that colored base will pretty much remain there, but I want the reflection to have the look of ripples in the water, and those will be horizontal. So as I blend, I'm pulling my brush from side to side. I also pulled a little bit of the color up above the horizontal line, just to show that the water extends back behind the flower. That gives a little bit more dimension to my colored piece. My first layers of color are dry, so I'm adding a little bit more pencil to deepen the shading. The nice thing about watercolor pencils is that you can blend them with water, or you can leave them unblended and use the sharp point to add more dimension and crispness to the lines in your shading. So on this layer of detail, I'm not going to blend with water. I'm just going to leave it as it is so that I have some more defined lines in my shading. In the bottom area, I'm adding more shading, but actually pulling the color horizontally with my pencil rather than following the curves of the image above as I did before. That just adds to the illusion of ripples in the water underneath. And when I blend with the brush on the bottom portion, I'm pulling from side to side as well. You'll notice that I'm using a smaller brush and not quite as much water as I used before when I blended. For the final layer of color, I'm using white acrylic paint, and I'll add just a little bit of water and stir it up to get an even mixture. And then just use a thin liner brush to brush some more horizontal strokes across the water area of my card. And for me, that just completes the look of the reflected water surface. Here are some closer views of my painted panel on a completed card. I hope you'll share your projects in the gallery, and I thank you so much for watching.